Thanks so much, Commissioner Ball. We really appreciate your time today. Thanks for talking about this stuff.
My pleasure. Thanks for asking about it.
Yeah, let's start with this concept of urban farming. The role the Department of Agriculture plays in this. I guess how do you want to incentivize it? How do you help out growers? Where do you fit into this industry?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. There's a little bit of history here. So I think that, our philosophy at the department since back in 2014 has been connect the dots. I mean, we say that every day. But the idea of New York State having such a vibrant agricultural community upstate, having the most amazing, diverse marketplace in the world at our doorstep, and the two not knowing each other very well, with most of our consumers 3, 4, 5 generations removed from ag, connecting the dots has been part of our DNA and our philosophy. And with the fact that we have about 3,000 urban farms, community gardens throughout the state that we know of, what better way to connect the dots than through those partners? And so this has been a priority for us. And we finally begun to get some traction and actually make some great progress with the community gardens, community task force. We're really seeing some progress there.
How big of the pie does the urban farming aspect fit into the rest of the farming in New York State when it comes to agriculture here?
Obviously, it's we're not going to feed New York City with the 400 some odd community gardens, urban farms that we have down there. But for us, it's about connecting the dots in a couple of different ways. One, from a marketing standpoint, just what we're capable of, what good food, nutrition food, what that's all about. But also about, finding the workforce that we're going to need as we go forward in New York State, growing our food system. Young people don't realize what farming is. And if I said to you, what's farming, we'd have to first say that 1% of the population is engaged in production agriculture. But if you start thinking about the food system, you start thinking about transportation and logistics and research and genetics and the new technology, now you're talking about almost 40% of the jobs in the country. So if you think about the food system, as we do this community garden work and urban garden work, we're connecting dots with people who may not become farmers, but may become critical components in our food system. And we learned this during the pandemic when we saw the disruptions in the food supply chain. Suddenly we realized we needed to put those chains back together again, reach a little deeper into the neighborhoods, our food system, the emergency food system and our pantries, reach a little deeper into our agricultural community to connect those dots.
And to be considered an urban farm, I guess, what are some of I know there's federal thresholds, for grant money. What about at the state level? What can you do to incentivize this and help people know that the ones that are growing vertically, maybe instead of over the course of acreage, I guess, what are some of your thresholds that they have to meet or you would like to see moving forward?
Yeah, we've got grant funding out right now. We're going to release about $1.5 million worth of awards here, and those projects will be released in 2025. We put together, as I mentioned, the Community Gardens Task Force. So we're meeting with the community gardens people and urban farm people across the states, not just in our urban areas, but all across the state, finding out what their needs are, finding out how we can help them. And we're not relying, there are assets on the federal side that have been available, but New York is going forward with its own funding to support these efforts. Because again, workforce development, but also about nutrition, connecting the dots there. Some of the things we learned from COVID-19.
The comptroller had a report out last month in November about the farmland and the decrease in that. I guess for you, what does that mean at the end of the day? Not just for the urban farmers, but also the ones that do it across the state at the more rural level too.
Well, that's obviously a concern. This is not new news. This is something we've been watching across the country. Every 5 years, USDA does, a census of agriculture. We work closely with USDA every day. So we're watching those trends. We've seen this happening for some time. And some of it's encroachment, suburban areas growing out into our farmlands. Some of it's, encroachment from, various factors around the state, closer to the cities, we have that creep. And some of it's from farmers who made a living in agriculture, don't have a next generation on the farm. Somewhere around 23% of our farms do not have a next generation. And they're apt to be acquired by a neighbor or a larger enterprise. But all those factors come together. So that's something that it's concerning. It's something we work on every day and something we're aware of. But it's a shifting in the size of farms. It's a shifting in who is farming. And quite frankly, the community gardens and urban farms programs help us create a pathway to preserving more of that farmland. We've got an active preservation program. We've, saved an incredible number of acres of land already through easements that have been created to buy the development rights. But we also find that, so many of our urban partners, community gardens folks, have immigrated here from another country. They have agrarian backgrounds, and they're looking to get a foothold and find their way to perhaps producing food in New York State. So those things help us, connect the dots again. I'm saying that a lot, but it really is about connecting a great agricultural community in New York State along with the population that needs to know who we are. And let me just say that those numbers are concerning, and we do things in reaction to them. We've got good programs in place, I think, to deal with that. But, New York State still ranks in the top 10 in over 30 different commodities. We still figure in every national conversation about agriculture. We still have some of the best growers in the country. We still have the best land grant system for ag education in the country here. And we still have the best land grant system to supplying those needs and the most diverse and amazing marketplace anywhere in the world. So we're in a good place. We need to capitalize on those assets and resources and keep growing.
Yeah, I spoke with the health commissioner, actually, coincidentally, about some of the things that they're doing to be able to be ready for the next administration at the federal level. Of course, I'd imagine the Department of Agriculture is doing, you're, like you mentioned, you're already making things more resilient and creating your own, I guess, supply. Let's start with the workforce aspect of this. You mentioned that when it comes to farmers and even those that are working on the farms, the mass deportation plans for the next federal administration. Is there a way you combat that, prepare for that? Is that a concern to you?
Well, again, it's something we think about daily at the department. We're going to have a change in administration. We need to build those relationships so we can keep going forward. You mentioned the workforce. Right now we do know across the country that as much as 40–50% of the workers in agriculture may not be properly documented. It's something that's been on the radar screen for most of my lifetime. And it's been the inability of the federal government to deal with a guest worker program, deal with immigration for decades. It's not a new problem. But it's coming to a head right now, and I'm hopeful that we'll get some resolution here. We need to have legal status for people that come to this country to work, to support their families in another country, wherever they came from. We need a way for them to come to the country legally, do the work, and go back home. That's what they want to do. This was a personal experience for me as I started farming, a long time ago. That was my experience. So I think we're still, coming to grips with the immigration side of things. We have opportunities as we go forward to build new relationships. As I mentioned earlier, we deal with the USDA every day. We deal with FDA every day. We deal with EPA every day. So who those people are, who the players are, what the policies are. And we're not just New York State there. All the commissioners, secretaries, and directors of ag across the country, we talk to each other on a regular basis. We go to Washington together to advocate on a bipartisan level for the concerns of agriculture across the country. And so, who we're going to deal with, who's going to be sitting across the table, we matter. We deal with American Farm Bureau, but the State Departments of Ag, along with American Farm Bureau, probably the two most relevant organizations in Washington, D.C., in terms of bipartisan influence on Congress and Capitol Hill. So we're in a transition phase, and we just have to let that play out and see who we're dealing with.
Seeing what happened the first time of this administration when it came to tariffs, 27 billion lost by the agricultural industry across the United States by 2019 when it came to that, because of some of those reactive tariffs. How much is that on your radar? What is your message to those in agriculture about that possibility?
Well, that's one of those things that keeps me up at night, frankly, Tom. I've had the opportunity to represent New York State at the Tri-National Accord. This was the 31st Tri-National Accord, was held in Washington, D.C. In October. The Tri-National Accord is a meeting between all the commissioners, secretaries, and directors in the U.S., all the ministers from the provinces in Canada, and the secretaries of ag from Mexico, all 32 states. And we talk about trade, we talk about the USMCA trade agreements, we talk about what the issues are and phytosanitary concerns, tariff concerns, etc. Because the Canadians and the Mexicans are our two largest export countries, partners, and customers. So that relationship is critical. We went through a challenging time. Then we got USMCA signed. In 2025, USMCA comes up for a review. That's what we talked about in October. So, anytime somebody throws out the word tariff or, restrictions on the market and fair trade going back and forth, it can have big implications. And so still don't know what that looks like. But, we were slated to have that review begin anyway in 2025, regardless of the administration in Mexico, Canada, or the U.S. So now we know what the administrations, Mexico just had an election. We've just had an election. Where are we really going to wind up? So we're watching that very closely because almost 40% of what we grow in New York State goes somewhere else, gets exported. And again, Canada and Mexico, the two biggest trading partners.
I think you look holistically at this industry and the need for it, obviously, and the importance, and it goes back to potentially healthy food, right, at the end of the day. This, I think you mentioned that earlier in the interview, it's just, this is, whether that's an urban farm or rural, whatever it's going to be, it does help connect. You talk to connecting the dots. It connects people to healthy food at the end of the day, which I think is probably one of the priorities here. And that's why this needs to be incentivized, resourced, and I think that probably is the bigger picture here, right? That we're trying to get people healthy food instead of some of the other stuff that you've heard about.
Tom, very well said. Very well said. A term that was thrown around for the last several decades has been food access, and that was accurate. But one of the lessons that came out of COVID-19, we lost a lot of people who had access to food, but they did not have access to the right food. They did not have good diets. We talked about food security. We really today need to talk about nutrition security. How do we get the right foods to people? So these efforts with urban community gardens, these efforts with farm to school, these efforts with the LFPA and what we call New York Food for New York Families, the funding to help reach deeper into our agricultural community to include socially disadvantaged farmers, to reach a little further down into the marketplace, to the food pantries and emergency food systems. This is critical to getting nutrition security. And so we're contemplating a new farm bill. That has to be an important part of that. But as we go forward, it's not just the economic benefits of agriculture and connecting those dots, it's the health. You mentioned talking with Dr. McDonald. He and I talk often. We agree that if we can get people healthier diets, we're going to have better health outcomes down the road. We'll have better economic outcomes down the road for our rural communities. It's a win-win situation. So again, dynamic right now. What's the farm bill going to look like? What's the new administration approach going to be? What are the trade implications of all of this? There's a lot of uncertainty out there, but I am happy to say that at least in New York, we have decades of programs to reinforce, these concepts in New York State.
Yeah.
And we'll keep doing that.
Yeah, and that almost circles us back to where we started with the urban farming, community gardens aspect of, I've done, speaking to those in this space, they speak to, of course, there's food deserts here and there, and some of that depends on travel, or, being able to transport themselves to a place with food. But also, it's not always a grocery store. And I think what always stuck out for me is that community garden can help get people to the food they need, or something of that nature. I think that probably is something not everyone understands about what the importance of the urban feel of a farm or food, and fresh food at that. It doesn't always have to be a grocery store, right? They can be an urban farm that contributes to a farmer's market, and that's why that part of the process, supply chain, is so important locally, right?
Totally, right on the money there. Yeah, exactly. So we've got to look at new ways of connecting the dots. We saw during COVID-19, we saw that half of our production in New York lost its marketplace because it went to institutions and schools and restaurants. And then we also saw that in the grocery stores, the shelves were empty, people couldn't access food. So it's one of the lessons there that we need to reconnect, replumb that food supply chain in New York, make sure it's resilient and responsive, make sure we have the processing capacity here to put the food we grow into a form that a family could utilize, that could get to our markets. So all of the above. But fortunately, in New York, we've got things like our farm to school programs, urban farm community gardens programs, 30% initiative for our schools to buy New York product, put that on the menu for the kids in the cafeteria. And now the governor's new executive order that all state agencies look at, buying at least 30% of their product from New York farmers. Let's not have New York depend on another country, another part of the world to get food if we ever go through a pandemic again. Let's make sure that we have the food shed right here in New York State to accommodate it.
Of course, this conversation born out of a mini story we had in Troy of a mushroom grower having to go outside of the city of Troy. I mean, like crops like that, I guess, where do they fit in this grand scheme? A mushroom crop. It's not soy or wheat, but where does that fit for you in terms of trying to incentivize this and grow that part of the industry, among others, too?
Yeah, we've got some pretty good mushroom growers in New York State already. Historically, they operate quietly, but they're doing a very good job. We've got some right in the capital region that are doing an excellent job. So New York State is a specialty crop state, specialty crops, sweet corn and fresh tomatoes and lettuce, broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower. And we have a tremendous dairy industry. So if you think about the Western United States, there's what we refer to as program crops, the corn, the soybeans, the cotton, the rice, the sugar. They own most of the land in the country, but more than half of the farm gate income across the country comes from specialty crops. That's what we're good at in New York. So, specialty crops, all the way down to mushrooms, all the way up to peaches, nectarines, and carrots. And we're really good at those crops. And those are things we focus on in New York State. And that's why our interest in this new farm bill, particularly as it pertains to the nutrition title and the benefits, getting people access to food, but also particularly as it pertains to the specialty crops, the things that we're good at in New York State. That makes this farm bill more relevant to New York State than any farm bill in history, in my estimation.
If you had to send a message to lawmakers about the farm bill, what would it be?
We need to get it done, and we don't need a smaller farm bill. We need a farm bill that answers those questions, that meets those needs. We did a listening session before this farm bill with the governor, as we did before the previous farm bills. And I've been around a lot of farm bills in my life. This one is more critical. And this, for the first time, somebody asked me if I was surprised by the conversations that we had listening. And I said, yeah, it was the first time I didn't hear farmers say, increase farm programs, decrease the nutrition title. And the first time I didn't hear people in support of SNAP benefits and the nutrition title say, cut the farm programs, don't cut us. I heard both sides say, we need the other side because the people on the nutrition title are the ag community's customers. They need a lot of food. We grow a lot of food. We need them. And we heard the nutrition title people saying, we need a healthy farm community, one that can supply us with our needs, which, as you know, have only increased since the pandemic. So I was very encouraged to hear that in New York State, We don't need a smaller farm bill. We need one that meets our needs. We put together a letter with the governor of what we heard. We've sent that to our congressional delegation. I get to weigh in with the state departments of ag nationally about that. And I think we've got the right approach here in New York State.
All right, finally here, since we have you, I think you have a PSA out about the lanternfly. What should people know about the lanternfly right now?
Well, first of all, they should know what it looks like, so they can go step on it. This is not high tech, but we need to, we need the public to be involved in this. There's not enough inspectors on the federal level or the state level to deal with this new insect. We're learning about the pest. We're learning who the enemy is and how they culturally grow and expand. But this one has caught us a little bit by surprise. We work with the USDA on it. We work with DEC on it. We're looking to identify it where it is in the state and try to stomp it out. But looking for egg masses, looking for the adults, and reporting it when they find it so that we can respond quickly. You can go to our website, agriculture.ny.gov, spotted lanternfly, SLF, and learn, some facts and figures about that. But we need to know where it is and how to respond quickly, is because it likes the crops. It likes specialty crops also. It's not just Christmas trees. And particularly sensitive, our wine producing areas, our grapes, the tomatoes, and, we're worried about all of it. But so far, we feel like we're monitoring it closely. We know where it is, where it isn't, but we need the public's help on this.
It must be pretty resilient. I mean, it's December. It's pretty harsh climate right now. If it's
sure, well, it's going dormant, but it's laid egg masses, and
okay.
You can walk out in your backyard and spot an egg mass, scrape it off. You're not going to find adults flying around right now because they've gone dormant, but they've laid a lot of eggs. So you can go on there and get educated about what to watch for.
Yeah, especially if the snow melting and the grass, ebbs and flows as the winter goes on. I'm sure that's a concern for sure. Commissioner Ball, we really appreciate your time. Really good conversation. Thank you very much.
It's my pleasure. You ask great questions, Tom. Thank you for this time.
Thank you.